Senator Rand Paul has been talking about tax reform for as long as I can remember. And Senator Paul, well, what do you intend to do with the code if you get elected?
Well, we'd get rid of the whole thing. You know, there's 70,000 pages, and I think the tax code is so complicated and so onerous that it's been chasing American jobs and American companies overseas. So I'd get rid of the entire tax code. I'd get rid of the IRS, and I'd have one tax rate for everybody, 14.5%, and you'd be able to fill out your tax return on a postcard. We'd make it so simple that you probably wouldn't even need an accountant.
That's the flat tax. That's Steve Forbes' old flat tax idea, and other people had that notion. That competes against the fair tax, which is some of the other candidates' notions to replace what we have now with the national sales tax. Why did you make this decision?
Well, you know, I think the bottom line is you want to know, will the change make government bigger or smaller or keep government the same? So really, it's not the kind of tax necessarily, whether it's a sales tax or an income tax. It's will it make government bigger, smaller, or the same? Mine will make government about almost $3 trillion smaller. What does that mean? It would leave $3 trillion in the hands of people who earned it. And I think you create more jobs by leaving money in Iowa and leaving money in the states and with the people. So that's the debate we ought to have. What kind of tax code is kind of important, but I think really simplicity is a great thing. But the real question is, will your tax changes make government bigger or smaller? I think Jeb Bush's tax changes might simplify the code, but I'm not sure they make government smaller. I think government may end up being about the same. But I can tell you for certain that nobody has a tax plan out there that makes government smaller than my tax plan.
You say you'd end the payroll tax. Is that FICA? You're talking about Social Security tax?
Yeah, the FICA, basically it would be rolled into the business taxes. So business would pay it, but the individual worker wouldn't have to. The advantage of this is that a lot of Democrats complain, oh, that flat tax only helps the rich. Well, because I get rid of the payroll tax, even those who don't pay an income tax will get a tax cut. So if you make $40,000 a year, you don't pay much in income tax under the current system. You wouldn't under mine, but you would also get rid of the $2,000 in payroll tax. And so I think this would be encouraging to American workers that not only will the new tax code bring jobs back home, it'll actually reduce the money that's taken out of your paycheck each week.
Tax code, people's eyes blur when talking about it, but people also know they're getting gouged and ripped off the way it now is. Do you think people are willing to listen to tax reform arguments while you're out there campaigning?
Absolutely. It's been very popular on the trail, and then that coupled with the fact that I want to make government smaller and that I want to leave the money in the private sector. I've even taken this message to the south side of Chicago and said, look, poverty programs aren't working when they're coming from the government. What I want to do is leave the money in your community and never take it from you, and then encourage businesses to move into your community by making the taxes the lowest in the country. So I would have special islands where we'd have almost no federal taxes to encourage people to come up out of poverty and to encourage businesses to locate there.
A couple of sound bites from people on the other side of your aisle, two quickies from Hillary.
I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified materials.
And yesterday she said,
that was a mistake. I'm sorry about that. I take responsibility. And I'm trying to be as transparent as I possibly can.
Those are not one-liners from a comedy routine.
Well, here's the thing is, we want a commander-in-chief who really has national security as a paramount interest. And when you have somebody who wants to be commander-in-chief, who won't obey the rules, and actually put some of our nation's secrets at risk, nation's secrets aren't just secrets for any old reason. They're secret to protect people. So one of the things you're trying to do is protect, actually, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. So her schedule should be secret and sensitive, and she shouldn't be sending that on a non-secure server because that gives her location, and she's probably got 5 or 10 people protecting her. It puts their lives at risk, not to mention all the other classified documents that are now coming out that she was passing around. I think also there's just so many appearances of impropriety between that, the Clinton Foundation. She had half of her campaign staff working over at the Clinton Foundation. the idea that she was presiding over whether or not a uranium company could be sold to the Russians while her husband was receiving speaking fees for talking to the bank that was brokering the deal. I mean, the list goes on and on. This woman should not be considered for commander-in-chief because she doesn't make sound decisions, and she appears to make decisions based on her own personal compensation.
Will she survive the run? Do you think she'll be on the ticket? The FBI is going to go after her. This is all speculation, of course, but you read the political tea leaves.
I don't think it's a certainty. I think for the last 2 years, everybody has considered her a certainty. I think one thing that might be the big shocker for people, everybody's talking about how wide open the Republican primary is. Wouldn't it be a shocker if the Democrat primary turned out to be just as freewheeling? What if you get to another month or two and Hillary is so beleaguered that you got Biden in the race and 2 or 3 of the ones not doing as well coming up on the heels with Bernie Sanders? You could have a 5, 6, 7-way race over there that is very competitive as people sort of say, oh, my goodness, she's dead in the water if she becomes our nominee.
Can you beat Biden?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're all very beatable because they have stale ideas of the past. I think nothing really that they talk about is any encouragement to how the American economy will grow again. It's the same old pablum.
How about Sanders?
Absolutely. I think socialism is a failed system, and people kind of shy away and don't point out that he's a socialist, but socialism requires force. I mean, if you want to sell water or vegetables or cows under socialism, they put you in prison if you're not officially sanctioned by the government. The government owns the means of production, and the only way they can do that is by the force of the gun. And so that's why when you had socialism under Stalin, you had tens of millions of people killed. Some of them are just trying to grow vegetables on their own land. So socialism is not a benign economic system. It's a horrific system that requires violence. And ultimately, if people were serious about considering Bernie Sanders, they're going to have to understand that he'll have to defend the violence of socialism.
Well, that side of the argument would say, well, we're not socialists, we're democratic socialists. Therefore, that's a big deal. It's a lot different.
Well, you know, the difference is that once the majority votes for socialism and you decide you don't want to be any part of it and you decide you want to sell your widgets at whatever price you want to sell it whenever you feel like selling it, if you do that, they send the police to your house. So ultimately, even if a majority votes in socialism, it still requires a police. You have to have a state police that go and prosecute and arrest people who try to sell stuff that aren't officially approved by the state. And we're sort of in between that. We're in between capitalism and socialism now. We have a regulatory police. We have 48 agencies in the U.S. that actually can police and come into your business, often without judicial warrant. And so, you know, they want more of that, and those of us who think that the free market creates great wealth, we want a lot less government intrusion into your transactions.
Donald Trump wants to embrace thousands of Syrian refugees. You think that's a good idea?
I think we need to have big hearts, but I think we also need to be smart about what we're doing. You know, after the Iraq War, we admitted 70,000 Iraqi refugees, primarily Muslim. Some of them in Bowling Green, my hometown, tried to buy Stinger missiles to attack us. They also, if they're pro-Western, might have been some of the best people to actually rebuild their country rather than leave the country. But you can't look at these children and trying to cross the water in the Mediterranean without sympathy. But it gets back to you can have sympathy and then you have to have policy. If the Germans continue to offer, large amounts of money for people to come to their country, they will be overwhelmed. They've even cut it back in the last few days. This is ultimately what Friedman said. Can you have open borders in a welfare state?
Yeah.
They have an enormous welfare state in Europe, and now they have basically this beckoning and this open borders. If you want less terrible tragedy and less of a mess in the world, what we need to do is, we shouldn't have been funding ISIS. We shouldn't have been arming the Islamic rebels in all of these wars, because that has made the situation worse.
One last question here, Senator Rand Paul. The gay rights circus came to your town, and it did its thing there in a courtroom. Resolvable? I noticed that you on one of the programs talked about the Religious Freedom Act there in Kentucky. You say it's not been tested yet.
We passed the Religious Freedom Act in 2013, and it allows elected officials to opt out or to try to find an accommodation if they have a religious conflict with application of a law. There is a very easy way out on this. This clerk religiously has an objection to same-sex marriage. She doesn't want to sign the document, but she said she will file the document with the state. She just doesn't want her name on it. Why couldn't you just have a notary of the public stamp it or sign it and file it? I don't understand why you couldn't do that without the clerk's signature on it.
Donald Trump says that the Supreme Court law which permitted same-gender marriage is now the law of the land. Do you agree with that notion?
Well, there is a supremacy to the Supreme Court decisions, and I think there is definitely truth to that. I do think, though, that there's also Religious Freedom Acts in 2013 that allow some religious exemption to the law. And so how the Religious Freedom Act interacts with the Supreme Court ruling hasn't yet been decided. But I think there are options, and I think if we go head-to-head against each other and we don't use persuasion, but we attempt to put people in jail who differ from us in their beliefs, I think that's going to make the situation worse. It will harden the resolve and will embitter the feelings more. So I'm more for letting people trying to work things out in an amicable fashion, and I think in this sense she could file these documents without her signature. Your signature is pretty personal. Your signature does imply your support and your condoning of certain things, and she just doesn't want her signature on there.
Senator Rand Paul, thank you for joining us this morning, sir.
Thank you.